Hi, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. If you haven't, I'm Gemma, I talk about books, and this is my October wrap-up. So the first book that I read in October was The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow, and I loved this one. So this is the story of three sisters who, for various reasons, have not spoken to each other for years. They are living in different places and they just happen to be witches. But this book is not about witches, essentially. This book is about women in general. It's about women fighting for their rights to work and good working environments and pay and healthcare and respect and housing and just being able to live safely. And it's about them working together to be stronger, to have a voice, and to fight for the things that men essentially are just handed. The fact that these women are witches just adds to the theme of them having power and being able to use it. Because the main antagonist of the book is not only a man and the mayor of the town where they live, but he is also hiding a secret. So this book takes place after the witch trials. This is in the late 1800s, so we've had the Salem witch trials and other various witch trials across the world, and witchcraft has basically been banned. So people who do practice do so completely in secret, and it's all underground and contained and hidden. But essentially, as I say, this book is about women, and not just about them being able to look after themselves, but them being able to look after each other. It's about a family reconnecting. It's about friendships being made. It's about relationships. So there is queer representation in this book, and it is done really well. The relationship between the two characters is actually really quite lovely. It's more about respect and building a relationship based on trust and respect and caring for each other, and actually less about the romance side. And as somebody who really is not keen on sort of romantic storylines in books, it's really nice to have a relationship build between characters that isn't just about weird flirting and sex and being super slushy and annoying. I really liked the way that storyline was integrated within the rest of the plot. But overall, this book is just about the characters. There's a lot of character building. All of the characters are very distinguishable. They're very identifiable. They all really stand out on their own and yet come together as this really, really well-developed, well-written group of people. So this is not a thriller. There's no mystery really involved. It's all just about you as a reader being on the side of these characters, wanting them to achieve what they want to achieve and rooting for them. And you do. And it's just a pure sort of feminist blast that I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun reading this. I would definitely recommend it. And that was the first book that I read in October. So the next book that I read was Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Maybury, and this was my favourite read of the month. I had an absolute blast reading this. I loved it. So in this book we have two timelines. We have an event that takes place 30 years in the past, and it has affected everything about this small town community, from the people to the businesses to the way they interact with each other to feuds that have carried on throughout the generations to just the way they celebrate the past and how they enjoy themselves. We then come forward in time 30 years to the present, and essentially something happens which makes everybody realise that the events of the past have come back to haunt them. This is a brutal, violent, gory, gruesome, dramatic book, and I loved it. So there are definitely some aspects which I don't necessarily love in books. There's some out and out racism, there's a huge amount of toxic masculinity. Some of the men in this book are absolutely diabolical. But if you read a lot of Stephen King, then you'll probably be used to that sort of tone and language and general vibe. But this book also had what I absolutely love in horror, which is a really detailed small town community with a brilliant cast of characters. The majority of them I absolutely hated. They were some of the most diabolical people I've ever read about. But when they're so well described and they're so realistic in sort of tone and feel, that you can imagine them actually being like that. So yes, the people are horrendous, but you're actually reading them so that you believe that they could be real, because you know that there are people out there who are like this in real life. But I'm not going to go into a massive amount about the plot because I don't want to give anything away. But it is full of drama. As I say, it is violent and brutal. So if you are at all squeamish about injuries and violence and blood and guts, then you might want to stay clear of this because there is a lot of it. There is also some scenes of violence towards women, which is not fun to read, but you know, it wouldn't be fair if all the violence was towards men either. So there is some equality in it at least. And the women do give as good as they get. One does especially. The one thing about this book though that I did not realise until I had already started reading it is that it's the first of a trilogy. And I'm really not sure if I want to read the other two. I think this book stands on its own so well that there's part of me that hates not finishing a series, but at the same time I just enjoyed this book so much as it was, and I thought the ending was so good. I'm not sure. So if you have read this series, just give me a little nod in the comments as to whether or not you think the second and third books are actually that good and worth reading. And I'll just throw it on the floor. Then next up I have Season of Mist by Paul Finch. As you can tell, this is a little novella, which is just under 180 pages. And I read this on Halloween weekend. And this book takes place on and around Halloween. And so it has all of the spooky season vibes that go along with that time of year. So this book's slightly different in that, for a change, it's not set in America. This is set in an old coal mining town in the north of England. And kind of following on the theme, it has that small town vibe to it. And along with that small town vibe, we also get a sort of folklore aspect. So this book is about a group of children who live in this area, and they are aware of this sort of folklore that surrounds the area, and it's concerning the old coal mine, which is now closed. But there are children who are being killed, and quite brutally, quite viciously in some cases. And it's a question of, is it a person? Is this from a real human being doing this thing? Or is it connected to this folklore? Is there a sort of supernatural entity who is bumping off kids in this town? The thing that is a little different about this book, though, is that it is told in the style of memories of one of the children grown up, who is now an adult. And he is basically relaying what happened years before. So all the scenes with the children take place in around the 1970s, and he is clearly talking 20 to 30 years on. I did really enjoy this book. I thought the general storyline was pretty well told. I thought it was a little obvious and predictable in places, and I just thought the ending felt a little rushed. But overall it was okay. I would definitely say that this is geared to a YA audience. I definitely feel like this was geared towards people who are around the same age as the characters. So when the characters are children, they are around the 12 to 13 mark. And I definitely feel that if you are of that age when you're reading this, then you'll probably get a lot more from it. I thought it was good. I thought it was fine. I thought the general storyline was okay. It was great if you're reading it at Halloween and sitting around wanting something a bit cozy. But for out and out scares and creep factor, it fell a little short for me. Then next up, I read Skeleton Crew by Stephen King, which is a collection of short stories. There are 22 stories in this collection, and the first one is probably the one that's most well known, which is The Mist, and it's also the longest story in this collection. And unfortunately, being the first story, it's also the best story. I would say that out of the 3 collections of his that I've read so far, so from Night Shift and Different Seasons and now Skeleton Crew, I would say this is the one that's the most disappointing as an overall group of stories. The Mist is by far one of his best short stories. It is creepy and horrendous and atmospheric and quite brutal and a bit heartbreaking in places, and it's genuinely one that creeps the hell out of me. And weirdly, I have read it before, but I had forgotten one key factor about it until I reread it again this time around, which is that it does involve giant spiders. Now, I am terrified of spiders, so how the hell I forgot that they were in that story, I don't know. But it was only when I was reading it this time around, I had that horrible feeling itchy all over and just kept thinking I could see spiders in various corners of the room. Unfortunately though, the other stories in this collection are just nowhere near as good. A few of them have some positive aspects to them. They either have some interesting characters, or they've got some good atmospheric feels about them, or the plot in general is quite interesting. But I would say overall, I didn't really love any of them, which ends up being a bit disappointing. So I would say that out of the whole collection, apart from The Mist, the best three were, just looking at the contents page, The Monkey, The Raft, and Survivor Type. They are the three out of this collection that I would probably recommend the most. The others were all kind of okay to just a bit bland and boring, unfortunately. And then finally, we have the non-fiction book that I read, which I absolutely loved. It's also one of the nicest looking books that I own, and that is Death and the Afterlife by Clifford Pickover. I mean, that cover alone is just stunning. So this is a non-fiction, and it is, reading on the front cover, it is a chronological journey from cremation to quantum resurrection. So this entire book is based around death, and it's everything from how different cultures deal with death and bodies and burials and what they believe in terms of the afterlife. But this isn't just a book where you have to read it all. This is told in simple double-page spreads. So I will insert some clips and pictures so that you can see. But essentially it's a small coffee table book. So you could just dip in and out of this and just read a few pages at a time, or look up the specific page that you want to read, or you could read it cover to cover. It's completely up to you. I actually picked this up at the start of October and just read about 10 pages each night before I went to bed and worked my way through it slowly that way. And it was just really interesting, and it's such a quick, simple way of getting not only some historical information, but cultural information, and learning about things that I had never even heard of. And also the pictures, the illustrations, the photos in this book are stunning. The whole overall design I absolutely loved about this book. And then I have started another book, which I definitely will not finish until probably mid-November, and that is It by Stephen King. At the time of recording this, I am about 50% of the way through, and I will tell you all about that in my November wrap-up. So they are the books that I read in October. Please let me know in the comments what the best book that you read during spooky season and what you are currently reading now. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, like this video, and if you subscribe, that would be absolutely fantastic if you haven't already. And I will see you in another video. Bye!